The bride's smile faltered when the cathedral doors slammed shut behind me, rainwater dripping across the marble aisle. Gasps echoed, but before she could sneer or speak, he moved. The CEO, the groom, the man I once swore I would never see again. Adrien rose from the altar with a suddenness that silenced even the priest. His gaze locked on me, soaked, trembling, clutching at the fabric of my ruined dress, and his words cracked through the church like thunder. No ceremony begins until she changes. The crowd froze. For a heartbeat, even the storm outside seemed to pause. The bride's knuckles whitened around her bouquet, petals snapping beneath her grip. Murmurs rippled through the pews, sharp whispers carrying judgment and disbelief. Who is she? Why would he say that? Does he even care about his bride? But Adrien didn't waver. His shoulders squared, his voice steeled, as though every eye on him only fed his resolve. He was not addressing the bride, nor the guests, nor even the priest, only me. My throat tightened as heat and shame warred inside me. I wanted to disappear into the storm again, to escape those piercing stares, but the weight of his jacket suddenly draped across my shoulders held me in place. The scent of him clung to the fabric, warm, familiar, dangerous. The bride's sharp intake of breath rang louder than any organ chord, her fury barely contained as Adrien's hand lingered near mine. Steady, protective, unshakable. And in that frozen silence, with 100 witnesses and heaven itself glaring down, one thing was undeniable. This wedding was no longer hers. It was mine. A hush blanketed the cathedral, heavy and suffocating, as if every breath had been stolen from the air. Dozens of eyes darted between Adrien and the bride, the weight of disbelief collapsing over the pews like an invisible storm. The bride's mother rose halfway from her seat, her jeweled fingers trembling as she whispered frantically to her husband. The groom's family exchanged alarmed glances, some clutching rosaries, others simply staring in horror at the unfolding scandal. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a spectacle, a war being declared in silk and marble. From the corner of my eye, I caught the priest's hand shaking as he tried to steady the ceremonial book. His lips parted to speak, but no words came. The authority of the church itself had been crushed under Adrien's single command. The bride's voice finally broke the silence, brittle and sharp, like glass splintering against stone. Adrien, what are you doing? This is our wedding, our vows, our life. Her tone cracked under the strain, desperation creeping in as her pristine image began to unravel. But Adrien didn't flinch. His gaze stayed anchored on me, unwavering, unrepentant, as if the world beyond my soaked figure no longer existed. The guests' murmurs grew louder, rising into a storm of speculation. Is she the mistress? How dare he embarrass his fiancée like this? Maybe the rumors were true. Each word was a dagger, carving me open in the sight of everyone. My chest ached with the urge to scream, to defend myself, yet the weight of Adrien's jacket across my shoulders was both shield and chain. He had thrown the gauntlet in front of everyone, and now the entire world was waiting to see what I would do. The silence broke like shattered glass when Adrien stepped closer, his polished shoes striking the marble with deliberate authority. Every movement radiated defiance, each step a declaration that this was his choice, not the crowd's. The bride's bouquet slipped from her trembling hands, scattering white roses across the aisle like fallen confetti at a funeral. Her face drained of color, the humiliation etched in her eyes sharper than any blade. Guests gasped audibly, some rising from their seats as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a groom defending someone. This was a groom undoing a marriage before it had even begun. Adrien's hand hovered just inches from mine, the air between us charged with electricity. You will not stand here, soaked and shamed, he declared, his tone softer now, but no less commanding. The warmth in his eyes contradicted the coldness in his words, making my heart clench in confusion. My knees weakened, torn between fleeing the weight of 100 hostile stares and collapsing into the safety of the man I once thought I lost. Behind us, the bride's cry cracked the silence again. Adrien, this is madness. She doesn't belong here. I am your bride. Her voice quivered with fury, echoing against the cathedral walls, but Adrien didn't look back. The priest hesitated, sweat beating at his temple, unsure if the ceremony was already undone. The audience waited for Adrien's next words, the church a battlefield where reputation and love collided. My pulse thundered in my ears as he finally turned to the crowd and said, voice unyielding, "This wedding will not proceed until she is treated with the dignity she deserves." Gasps rippled like a wave, and in that instant the ceremony was no longer about vows or tradition. It was about him, about me, and the storm we had just unleashed together. The cathedral doors had barely stopped trembling when the storm outside seemed to move inside. Guests leaned forward in their seats, their whispers swelling into a tide of judgment and scandal. The bride's family huddled together, their faces twisted in outrage, as though Adrien's words had desecrated generations of honor in one breath. The bride herself, Elena, staggered back a step, her veil trembling as fury burned behind her eyes. "Do you see what you've done?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous enough to cut through the silence. Her knuckles whitened as she pointed toward me, each syllable dripping with venom. "You brought this girl here? Drenched and pathetic. Do you think she belongs in our world?" Adrien didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple, but his voice carried with unshakable calm. "Elena, enough." Just 2 words, but they rolled across the cathedral with the force of thunder. The crowd stiffened. The priest lowered his eyes, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. My breath caught as his presence, unyielding, commanding, wrapped around me like a shield. I wanted to step back, to shrink into invisibility, but the warmth of his jacket on my shoulders kept me rooted. I couldn't escape, not when every word, every gesture was dragging me deeper into the storm. Elena's composure snapped. She lunged forward, seizing Adrien's arm, her nails biting into his sleeve. "Look at them," she cried, spinning to the crowd. "Do you see how he humiliates me? On our wedding day." Her shriek reverberated across the vaulted ceiling, bouncing back in an echo of betrayal. And yet, even in her desperation, Adrien's eyes never left mine. In that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just a confrontation between bride and groom. This was a battlefield, and I had become the prize. Elena's accusation hung in the air like smoke after gunfire, but Adrien's silence was deadlier. He gently pried her hand off his arm, the gesture firm yet merciless, and stepped forward until the distance between us vanished into a breath. His broad shoulders blocked me from the crowd's sight, his shadow consuming mine, and when he spoke, his words cut sharper than any blade. "Humiliation isn't what I've done to you, Elena. It's what you've done to yourself." Gasps erupted, the sound swelling into chaos as guests twisted in their seats, desperate not to miss a second of the scandal. Elena's face contorted, her flawless facade crumbling with every second that passed. She lunged again, her voice a shrill echo through the cathedral. "You think she's better than me? That girl dripping water on the marble, dressed like a beggar? Look at her, Adrien, look at me." Her desperation was raw, unpolished, clawing for dignity that was slipping through her fingers like sand. But Adrien didn't flinch. His jaw hardened, his eyes burning with a fire I had only ever seen once before, the night he'd walked away from me years ago. Turning deliberately, Adrien faced the crowd, his voice deep and unshakable. "You look at her," he ordered, pointing not at Elena, but at me. "This is the woman who knows storms and survives them, the one who doesn't break when the world laughs. She's worth more than silks, more than gold, more than every ounce of pretense choking this room." His words crashed over me, over the guests, over Elena herself, an unrelenting tide that shifted the balance of power before everyone's eyes. And as the whispers turned to stunned silence, one truth became undeniable. The wedding had already been rewritten. The cathedral cracked under the weight of Adrien's words. Whispers died instantly, swallowed by the echo of his defiance. For a long, unbearable moment, no one dared to move. Then, slowly, the guests began to shift in their seats, some leaning forward with fascination, others recoiling as if the scandal might soil them simply by proximity. A few younger women clasped their hands to their mouths, stifling gasps of envy. To them, it wasn't disgrace they were watching. It was the stuff of legend, a forbidden romance playing out before their eyes. Elena, however, could not contain herself. She stormed toward Adrien, her gown dragging across the marble, her eyes wild with humiliation. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice cracking under the strain. She reached for his arm again, but this time he didn't even grant her the dignity of a response. Instead, he turned his back to her entirely, a gesture more brutal than any spoken rejection, and faced me. The world tilted as his hand brushed against mine, grounding me in a reality I hadn't chosen but could no longer escape. Gasps filled the sanctuary again, but this time they were aimed at him, not me. A voice from the groom's side muttered he's lost his mind. Another, sharper, hissed, "This will ruin us all." Yet none of it mattered. Adrien's eyes were locked on mine with a clarity that made the rest of the room blur into insignificance. The bride's sobs echoed behind us, raw and furious, but his voice carved through the chaos with terrifying certainty. I would rather destroy this wedding than betray myself again. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn, not only between Adrien and Elena, but between love and duty, defiance and tradition. The cathedral erupted. What had been tense silence only moments before now boiled into chaos, voices clashing like cymbals in a discordant orchestra. Guests rose from their seats, some shouting Adrien's name in outrage, others whispering feverishly as though their gossip could rewrite what had just unfolded. The bride's father thundered down the aisle, his cane striking the marble like a war drum. "You disgrace this family," he bellowed, his face flushed crimson. His voice trembled with a fury that promised more than words. This was not just a broken wedding. It was the dismantling of alliances, of fortunes, of a dynasty itself. Elena's sobs shattered the air. She clutched her veil, ripping it free as though tearing away her pride along with it. "You'll regret her, Adrien. She will ruin you, ruin everything." Her cries echoed against the stained glass, frantic, unhinged, desperate. Yet, even as her world collapsed, Adrien didn't falter. He moved closer, his frame shielding me entirely now, and the heat of his presence drowned out the storm of insults that raged through the church. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just rebellion, it was a declaration. He wasn't standing against Elena alone. He was standing against them all. The priest slammed his book shut, unable to continue, his trembling hands betraying the sanctity of the ceremony. And then, almost impossibly, Adrien bent closer, his words meant only for me, though the crowd strained to hear. "They'll hate me for this," he murmured, his voice steady. "But I don't care, because for the first time, I choose you." My heart clenched, torn between fear and longing, as the cathedral burned with outrage around us. The cathedral was no longer a place of vows. It had transformed into an arena of scandal. Guests shouted over one another, their polished civility crumbling into raw hysteria. Women clutched their pearls while men barked demands for order, their voices cracking with panic at what this meant for reputations and alliances. Reporters, invited only to document a perfect society wedding, now scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their eyes gleaming with the scent of blood in the water. Tomorrow's headlines were already being written, and every word would turn this moment into legend. Elena collapsed against her mother's arms, her once perfect image dissolving into tears and rage. "She's nothing," she wailed, pointing at me with trembling hands. She doesn't belong here, she never will. You're humiliating yourself, Adrien. Her voice rang sharp, fractured, desperate. Yet even her screams couldn't mask the sound of the crowd splitting into factions, some siding with her, some staring at Adrien with a dangerous kind of awe. Adrien's father finally stood, his presence commanding, his face carved in stone. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice deep and final. "This wedding is over." His declaration sent a ripple through the cathedral, silencing even the loudest whispers. But Adrien only turned, his eyes finding mine as though no one else existed. "Not over," he said firmly, his words carrying across the room like a vow. "It's only beginning." And in that moment, the scandal crystallized into something larger than humiliation. It became a story of defiance, a promise forged in the ruins of tradition. The audience hadn't just witnessed a ruined wedding. They had witnessed the birth of a war. The cathedral had lost all semblance of sanctity. Chairs scraped harshly against the marble as guests abandoned their seats, some storming out in outrage while others lingered, desperate not to miss the next eruption. A bridesmaid fainted near the front pew, her friends fanning her as though tragedy were contagious. The orchestra, frozen mid-note, set down their instruments in uneasy silence, their music forever silenced by scandal. What should have been vows of devotion had devolved into a battlefield of gasps, cries, and broken alliances. Adrien stood at the center of it all, unmoved, unbending, a lone figure facing a sea of betrayal. His father's decree still lingered in the air, but Adrien didn't yield. Instead, he reached for me, his hand closing around mine with a firmness that drew every gaze in the room. The weight of the gesture hit like lightning. Whispers turned into stunned silence, the entire church holding its breath. "If you can't accept her," he said, his voice ringing with terrifying clarity, "then you don't accept me." Elena screamed, her voice shrill and fractured. "You'll destroy yourself for her." She clutched at her gown as if it were armor, but her words carried no power anymore. For the first time, the audience's eyes shifted, not with pity toward her, but with intrigue toward us. Adrien pulled me forward, past the petals and shattered pride scattered across the aisle, past the shocked faces that no longer mattered. And as the heavy doors creaked open, light pouring in from the storm outside, I realized the truth. This wasn't an ending, it was a rebellion. The wedding was broken, but in its ashes, Adrien had chosen me before them all. And no force in that cathedral could undo what had just begun. The cathedral doors slammed behind us, muting the chaos within. But outside the storm had not softened, it had only shifted. Rain pelted against the pavement, soaking into the hem of my ruined dress. But it felt almost liberating compared to the suffocating stairs we had just escaped. Flashes of light exploded around us, reporters already gathered at the gates, their cameras cutting through the downpour like lightning. Questions hurled from every direction. "Why did you stop the wedding?" "Who is she?" "Is this a scandal or a love story?" Their words collided in the air, each one more intrusive than the last. Adrien tightened his grip on my hand, pulling me closer as if shielding me from bullets instead of questions. His suit, now clinging with rain, made him look less like a groom and more like a soldier marching into war. "Don't answer them," he murmured, low and steady, as though his voice alone could anchor me in the storm. My chest heaved, panic clawing its way up my throat, but his eyes, unwavering, resolute, kept me from collapsing. He was too calm, too deliberate, as though he had expected this rebellion all along. Behind us, the church bells tolled, but instead of marking vows, they sounded like a funeral for the life he had just abandoned. Guests spilled into the streets, umbrellas clashing, voices rising in outrage. Elena's cry pierced even the storm, her figure collapsing against her family at the threshold. But Adrien didn't turn back. He led me forward through the rain, past the crowd, past the cameras, past the ruins of everything that had been expected of him. And with every step, the truth settled deeper into my bones. This was no longer a wedding. It was a revolution, and I had just been dragged into the center of it. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest that awaited us. Within hours, headlines flooded every screen, every phone, every whispering mouth across the city. CEO abandons bride at the altar, chooses mystery woman instead. My face, pale and rain-soaked, was plastered alongside Adrien's across the internet, dissected by strangers who knew nothing about me, yet spoke as if they owned my soul. The narrative wasn't ours anymore. It belonged to the world. Inside his car, the silence was suffocating. The driver dared not speak. The only sounds were the slap of rain against the glass and the distant wail of sirens. Adrien's phone vibrated endlessly on the console. Calls from board members, furious relatives, investors who had staked fortunes on the stability of his marriage to Elena. Each unanswered ring felt like a warning bell. Each ignored message another bridge set ablaze. "They'll demand explanations," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They'll want blood." Adrien finally looked at me, his expression unreadable, carved in stone. "Let them," he said coldly. "I've already chosen my side." His words should have reassured me, but instead they settled like a heavy weight in my chest. His side was mine now, and that meant I had inherited his enemies, his scandals, his wars. Far from the cathedral, the city lights blurred through the storm. But I knew we were driving not towards safety, but into the heart of something unstoppable. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The family, the company, the world, they would not forgive. And as Adrien's hand tightened over mine, I realized the question wasn't whether I loved him. It was whether love could survive the war we had just declared. The retaliation came faster than the storm outside. By the time Adrien and I reached his penthouse, the phone calls had escalated into formal threats. His father's voice, cold and clipped, cut through the receiver. "Step down from the company, or we will strip you of everything. You think love shields you? It doesn't. It ruins you." The line went dead before Adrien could reply, but the words lingered like poison. Soon after, his secretary sent an encrypted message. Shares plummeting, board members calling emergency meetings, whispers of a hostile takeover spreading like wildfire. Every decision Adrien had ever made as CEO was now under scrutiny, every headline twisting him into a reckless man, undone by desire. And me? I was painted as the root of it all. Social media exploded with speculation. The gold digger, the temptress, the scandal that brought a dynasty to its knees. I sat frozen, the rain from my hair still dripping onto the pristine carpet, as Adrien paced the room with the ferocity of a man preparing for battle. "They'll try to erase me," he muttered, his fists clenched at his sides. "But they won't win. Not this time." His eyes burned when they found mine, defiance and vulnerability colliding. "You have to understand, standing beside me means war. Against them. Against everything." The weight of his words pressed down harder than any storm. I hadn't asked for this battlefield, yet here I was pulled into a war where love was both the shield and the weapon. And as the city lights flickered far below, I knew there would be no retreat, only the fight that was coming. The doors to the press hall opened, and a storm of flashes blinded me instantly. Reporters swarmed like vultures, their cameras clicking, their whispers cutting sharper than any blade. They wanted a broken man, a disgraced bride, and a nameless woman trembling under the weight of scandal. Instead, Adrien walked forward with a calmness that could silence thunder. His hand found mine, not tentative, not hidden, but firm, deliberate, and for all to see. The simple act set the room ablaze. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Microphones rose like weapons, and the air crackled with disbelief. Every step felt like defiance. I had arrived expecting shadows, but with him at my side, the light seemed to bend in our favor. His posture was unshakable, his jaw locked with resolve, and though the world called him traitor, in that moment he looked untouchable. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. Adrien wasn't entering this room as a CEO fighting for his empire. He was entering as a man daring to fight for me. The silence before he spoke was heavier than any judgment. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for a split second I thought I might collapse. But he didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The world had gathered to witness a fall. Adrien was about to turn it into a coronation. Adrien faced the avalanche of flashing lights, and when he spoke, the room fell into an unnatural hush. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command, cutting clean through the noise. "Yes," he said, eyes sweeping across the crowd of reporters. "I walked away from an altar. And yes, this woman is the reason." Gasps broke out. Cameras clicked furiously, but he didn't falter. His grip on my hand tightened, steady, protective, and unyielding. "She is not an intruder. She is not a scandal. She is the person I choose now and forever." The words rang like a verdict, and the audience shifted uneasily, caught between disbelief and fascination. If that decision costs me my fortune, my title, even my family, so be it. But it will never cost me my truth. His gaze burned with conviction. His jaw set against the tidal wave of disapproval. I could feel the tremor of tension running through the room, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Yet Adrien looked untouchable, almost regal, a man who had been broken down in front of the world and refused to bend. His declaration was not just for me, but against everyone who thought love could be bought, arranged, or silenced. And in that moment, with his words hanging like fire in the air, I realized the fight was already over. Not because we had won, but because Adrien had drawn the line, and nothing, not power, not money, not even blood, would make him cross it. The room erupted, questions hurled like bullets, voices overlapping in a storm of chaos. Microphones stretched toward him, reporters desperate to twist his words into headlines. But Adrien didn't answer a single one. Instead, he lifted my hand higher so every camera could see, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to freeze. His eyes, dark and unwavering, locked onto mine, and in that gaze was the promise of an ending and a beginning all at once. Then, with a calmness that silenced even the most relentless voices, he spoke his final line. "The wedding that collapsed today will not define me. The woman beside me will." Gasps rippled through the hall, and before the frenzy could reignite, he guided me away from the podium. His stride was steady, unhurried, as though walking out of fire with nothing left to burn. Reporters shouted behind us. Security scrambled, but the only sound that mattered was the echo of our steps leaving that battlefield together. The doors closed, sealing the chaos on the other side, and for the first time since stepping into that church soaked in rain, I could breathe. Adrien didn't let go of my hand, not once. And I understood there would be consequences, wars to fight, bridges already turned to ash. But in that moment, the story was no longer about humiliation, betrayal, or scandal. It was about a man who defied an empire and a woman who refused to kneel. The world could rage outside those doors. Inside, we had already chosen our forever.